Great. And we'll go to, yeah, just want to go to full screen on that. Perfect. Okay, so there's our welcome. Again, this is our spring session. Try to do this twice a year. If I just move on to the agenda, next screen, Dakota. Thanks. Okay, so we're done with our introductions and overview. The ZBA and variance process will be our first topic. Spend about 20 minutes on that, 25 minutes. Then we'll get into some variance best practices. After that, we'll pivot to our second topic, which is solar array development. A little bit of background on that and some specific land use control. Information on that, and then move to some best practices that we've I guess sort of seen with the projects that we've looked at. We know solar is a really burgeoning land use issue right now, so we'll give you everything that we can to help you better understand that that type of land use development. So that being said, we'll start with our first topic, which is a ZBA, Zoning Board of Appeals overview. And Dakota and I will sort of bounce back and forth on these slides, just so you don't get tired of hearing either one of our voices. I'll start off with just a little introduction to the ZBA. So Zoning Board of Appeals. Now, I know some of you are zoning board members, others are planning board members. You may think, oh, I don't need to listen to the ZBA portion of this. Well, there's a really strong connection between the two boards. And we would hope that your ZBA and your planning board are talking to each other, because there are often instances where one project may need something, an area variance, as well as a special use permit or a site plan review. And so there should be some communication between the two boards. So that's why, even though it's going to be geared toward the ZBA, there's certainly something for everyone in the Zoning Board of Appeals section here. So just some quick background notes. 3 to 5 members. That's what the law says. Preferably 5 members are better than 3 members, because what happens if somebody goes to Florida or somebody is ill? You want to have a few more members there that can fill in. Alternate members as well. The membership is 3 to 5, but adding an alternate membership is an important component as well. If a zoning code has been established, then a ZBA must be established. There's not room for other boards to take up the role of what the ZBA is. The law is very clear that if there is a zoning code in a municipality, there must be a way to offer relief to that code, and that's through the Zoning Board of Appeals. What does the ZBA do? They do basically 3 things, and 2 are lumped together in variances. They issue use and area variances, and they offer interpretations. And that's the primary function of the Zoning Board of Appeals. As I said before, they also communicate with the planning board to know what's going on in a municipality. We'll jump to the next slide, Dakota, please. Yes, sir. Thanks. Okay, so again, what is the action by the board? What is a use variance? Just to go back to some basics here. Use variances allow for a use to happen in your community that is not permitted in your land use code. In your code, you have a list of permitted uses in every district. If someone wants to do something that is not permitted, they want to have a commercial use in a residential zone, that's not allowed through your zoning code. A use variance is one way in which they can allow that to happen, or that the board can allow that to happen. Another action is the area variance process, and that is limited to dimensional relief. Someone has something that is, they want to do something that is specified in your code to limit a setback or a front yard, and they want to vary what dimensional requirement is in your code, then they'll go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for what's called an area variance. Area variances certainly more popular than use variances. Area variances easier to obtain than use variances. And we'll talk about that when we get into how you go about issuing these types of things. Variance process, think of it as a relief valve. It's an opportunity to, if you just can't get a project through and it has merit, the ZBA can issue a use or area variance to allow that to happen. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, please. The other option or other action that the ZBA takes is in interpretations, and this is not as common as the use variance process. And I've talked to several ZBA members that have never been involved with an interpretation, but it may come up, and there's opportunity for it to come up. And usually it happens when there's a disagreement. The code enforcement officer in your municipality may disagree with an applicant who says, "Oh no, this use is permitted," or this definition is not as you read it, it means this. Well, you've got two individuals that have a different opinion. Who's the decider in this case? It's the Zoning Board of Appeals. They will interpret what the code says. They'll interpret what the language in the code or in the definition section says for the municipality. It's beneficial to the code officer. It's also beneficial to applicants. Couple ideas here that we've heard over the years is, well, the ZBA won't, or the ZBA can't review planning board decisions. So the planning board makes a decision, the applicant doesn't like the decision, I'll just go to the ZBA. Well, I've heard that a number of times. I'm going to go to the ZBA to appeal a special use permit. That's not how the process works. The appeal process is not to the Zoning Board of Appeals for action taken by the planning board. The planning board is, there may be an opportunity for the planning board to be involved, but the ZBA is not a reviewer of special use permits by the planning board. That decision is left to the courts. Okay, so another argument or comment that we've heard a number of times is that municipal boards, a decision by the ZBA is not liked by an individual. I'll go to the municipal board and I'll get them to overrule the ZBA. They can't overrule the ZBA because they have autonomous power. The ZBA has a lot of authority here. What the municipal board can do, however, is change the law. That's the authority of the municipal board, is to change what the Zoning Board of Appeals interprets and what the Zoning Board of Appeals issues for variances, use and area variances. All right. Okay, we'll move on to some specifics now, thanks to Dakota. Use, and I'll talk about use variances. Dakota's going to talk about area variances. There are two key terms here, two key words in the first sentence. The applicant must demonstrate hardship by satisfying each of the legal tests. Those two words are hardship and each. And I say that, I'll go backwards, each of the legal tests. There are 4 tests here. An applicant has to show an answer, a legitimate answer that the Zoning Board of Appeals agrees with for each of the 4 tests. Not 1, not 2, not a majority, not just 3, but all 4 of the legal tests. So it's not a question of, well, they got 1 out of 4. Well, they sort of made it on 2, but they didn't get 3. No, it's got to be all 4, or it has to be a denial. That's it. The law is very clear on the the authority of the tests being each test must be met. And how do you meet them? You have to demonstrate hardship. There has to be clear evidence that for each of those things, that there's no reasonable return. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about what does reasonable return mean. It sounds, very financial, and that's exactly what it is. There has to be some showing of some financial hardship for there to be a check beside an applicant meeting the first box. Hardship is unique. Boy, that's a little subjective. What does unique mean? Who gets to determine what unique is? Well, we'll give you some tips on how you can identify what unique is in a few minutes. Again, another subjective one, apparently, or could be, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Who decides on character? You do, the ZBA members do, and we'll give you some tips on how to determine what that is. And the last one, probably the most difficult test of all, hardship has not been self-created. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You can't say, I didn't know, or you can't say, oh, I'll buy this property and then I'll just get a use variance to do what I want to do with it. The individual has created their own hardship in that instance. So self-created hardship is a really tough test to meet. Okay, I'm gonna switch. We'll switch presenters here. We'll move on to area variances with Dakota. I just want to remind everyone, thank everyone for joining, and remind everyone, please put your name in the chat just so we have a record of your attendance. That way we can get you a certificate going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dakota. Thanks, Dakota.
Hey, thanks. As we move into area variances, very similar in terms of what an applicant would have to go through. However, some significant differences in terms of versus a use variance. When considering an area variance, you have 5 balance of interest tests. Sometimes we call them legal tests as well. Depends on the wording at the moment. But commonly you'll find, I just want to reiterate, commonly you'll find this information if you have zoning in your community in the administration section of your land use codes. Usually there's language addressing the ZBA, and you'll usually find this information because it can be hard to find if you don't know where it is. Some things to consider in terms of checking out an application for an area variance. Would the applicant's proposal, create an undesirable change to the neighborhood? And what is that? Well, you can think of that as, citing a variety of buildings close to a property line where that didn't exist previously, considering that kind of area variance. Then also something to consider is, can an alternative be achieved? Can you take into account the site plan and actually redesign a proposal to avoid an area variance? It definitely can be common for sure. Whether or not the variance is substantial, subjective to a degree, depends on, maybe height in a residential neighborhood, again, proximity to lot lines, front yards as well. Going from, say, a 25-foot setback to, say, the single digits. It all depends on the ZBA's interpretation of substantial too. Negative impacts on the environment. Commonly here we think about how to treat water runoff on a property if an area variance is being sought to maybe expand the size of the footprint of a building or a garage. Where will that runoff go on? Will it stay on the property, or will it bleed over into the neighboring property owner? And then again, starred here is the hardship self-created, because as Jason had mentioned, it's good applicants should know of the zoning regs in their town or village, and therefore should be aware of those particular pieces too. And what's nice about this option here, you don't have to meet all 5 of them, right? But these are considered by the ZBA when considering a area variance application. And in all, the overview of this process, the ZBA should take into account to grant the minimum variance that is reasonable when considering these types of applications. Okay. We're going to move into variance best practices, and this goes for area and use. Something to or some knowledge to share is that variances do run with the land, not with the current landowner, and that's a common question we get a lot. So good record keeping is critical there. Hopefully you find that type of information within your municipality CEO or planning board records. Town clerks, village clerks are very helpful with that kind of information as well. Conditions can always be attached to variances as well. For example, a common condition, depending on, say, use or area, could be some sort of screening, especially if the use is, out of character in the neighborhood. Some sort of screening can help accommodate that use, or even on an area variance as well. Push for more information. This is a good reminder too, because we'll commonly look at area and use variances, and an application from a municipality in the county will have, for use, they'll have the 4 legal tests, or for an area they'll have the 5 balance of interest tests, and an applicant will only fill out, say, 1 or 2. For an area variance, maybe there's some room there, but for the use, that information is critical if you're seeking approval from the ZBA. And that shouldn't feel cautious with asking an applicant to spend some time. And CEOs, they are very busy individuals, and commonly they are helping applicants with this type of information. So thank you, CEOs, for doing that for your municipalities. And then for area variances, what's a big deal? What's substantial? Is 5 feet not a big deal? 40 feet a big deal? You want to be consistent for sure. It may depend on the neighborhood. You may have a residential neighborhood that has large lots with spacious lot lines. So maybe the larger number, if someone's seeking an area variance down from, say, 35 to 10, isn't so bad. But in your older established neighborhoods where those buildings and lot lines are much closer to each other, those area variances could be substantial at the smaller numbers. But ultimately keep consistent. Okay. And attaching more on conditions here. And again, use and area here is applicable. Reminding ZBAs to grant the minimum relief necessary. Take some time and consider this particular piece. Are there alternatives that can be achieved, especially on the area side? Looking at the site plan, can things be moved to accommodate existing regulations? Same thing for use as well. Can the use be modified? Even though the use variance is definitely the more challenging approval in the variance process, but could the use be modified to fit within the particular proposal? Also, you can think of a time allowance in terms of the variance process. You could attach that as a condition, particularly say on the use side. If a use goes dormant for a year, then that use is no longer permitted. I guess they could always seek another use variance, but it would be challenging to acquire with those provisions attached to a previous condition. And think about the location, specifics to the property and the benefit of the neighborhood. In the area, we see a lot of area variances, and for the most part, they're not too substantial, but the use could probably be the more substantial impact to the neighborhood. And you have to take that into account when looking at those proposals. Is it in a residential area? Is it in a mixed use area that allows both residential and commercial mixes? Is it industrial? So definitely keep in mind the character of the neighborhood of those particular locations. Okay. Moving on to best practices for use variances. Jason.
Thanks, Dakota. Appreciate that. Good stuff there. We did get one question in the chat that we'll make sure when we get back to. It was with regard to the hardship test, balance of interest test for an area variance. How can you say that the hardship hasn't been self-created for an area variance? It's a great question. We'll keep everyone in suspense when we get when we get to the best practice slides for area variances, we'll touch on that when we get to the last one. So thank you for that question, and we'll make sure we give you everything we know to answer that. So best practices here for variances, and this is, we sort of set this up as an example of, okay, how can I actually understand what these tests mean? And for use variances, the legal tests. Pardon me. So what's the first legal test for use variances? No reasonable return on the property. Well, what does that mean, reasonable return? First of all, it doesn't mean, well, I'll tell you what it does mean. It means that the applicant really needs to show that they've tried to make a go of what they have now as the use, as something that is a permitted use in that zoning district. Have they shown you that they tried, it's a residential zone, they tried to sell it as a residence, they tried to sell it rented as a residence, they have no takers? Do they have evidence to say, hey, look, we put it on the market, nobody bought it? You know, in this market, probably someone will buy it. But in a residential zone, you have to say, yeah, we did try to use it for a residential use, or whatever use, the list of uses that are permitted in that zone, and we just couldn't do it. And we have evidence here that shows dollars and cents proof is what is actually in the law, that they haven't been able to, or the applicant hasn't been able to make a go of it. That's really, you know, that's probably the second hardest test to meet. It may not be that hard, but it's often overlooked by applicants, and they rarely will an applicant really put the effort into trying to meet this legal test. Often what we see is that I couldn't make enough money from this use, so I want to do this so I can make more money, or I need to do this to break even, or it's a better use, it's better for me. The question isn't always better for the applicant. It's what we're talking about, the community here. We're talking about the holistic, looking at it from a holistic view of what is in the best interest of the community, not just the individual that owns the property. So the idea that I need to do this to make money does not cut it as an answer to the first legal test. The second one, hardship is unique. And this is, again, I mentioned earlier about subjectivity here. It is a little subjective, but also it can be pretty clear. Is there something really unique about the property? Is it built on a rock ledge? Is it right next door to a highway or a roadway that is really impeding what can be used on that property? Is it unique to the zone? What this means is that not every single parcel could argue the same unique argument. We often have seen that, well, it's unique because I have a really unique idea of what I want to do with this piece of land. Well, maybe if everybody could do that really unique idea on their land, then it's not unique. So it wouldn't meet that legal test. It has to be specific. It has to be tied to the property. Okay, we'll go on to number 3, or next slide. Thanks. Yep. Essential character. Again, somewhat subjective. What is the character of the neighborhood? Well, you know, you all live in your communities. You know what you want as character in your community. Maybe it's in a local comprehensive plan. Maybe it's past practice. But you know one thing is that you don't want to see a huge amount of increased traffic on a residential street near a school. So, or where there's a concentration of residences with small children, something like that. Traffic impacts are really a great bellwether for a lot of impacts to communities, changes to communities, changes to the character of a community by an increase in traffic flow. Aesthetics are another thing. Do you want something that is visually out of place either by size or by design in that community. Those are the kind of things that if an applicant can meet that, if they can show, no, there won't be any traffic impacts by me putting this in here, it's really not going to change the character of the neighborhood. If they go into detail, then that's going to get them further down the road to meeting this test than something like, oh, I'll just make it look nice and the neighbors are fine with it. Okay, well, if I had a nickel for every time I heard, oh, it's going to look great, I'm going to fix it up nice. We've all heard that, right? And sometimes it happens, and that's great. Unfortunately, the majority of the time, it doesn't happen. And there's subjectivity here. Well, I think it looks fine. I think it looks great when there's lots of debris scattered around the site. Well, again, that's where the subjectivity comes in, and that makes it somewhat challenging. The second statement there, well, the neighbors are fine with it. Well, that's great. Yeah, the applicant may have talked to the neighbors. They may not care because they may not know the full extent of what's going to happen or what that project is going to become in the future. And the other good thing about area, both variances, use and area, is that there is a public hearing requirement for them. So the neighbor may be fine with it according to the applicant, but when you have the public hearing and the neighbor's there in person, they may have a different opinion. So it's really important to get that buy-in from the community through the public hearing process, not always just take the applicant's word at face value. Okay, the last one here, and we talked a little bit about this before, not self-created, and this is challenging. What is, when is it not self-created? The argument that, well, I didn't know that it was not permitted. Well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You have to know that. You have to be aware of what you can use your property for before you purchase it. So if you buy something and then decide to do something that isn't permitted, you've created your own hardship. You need to know that in advance. Now, when is a self-created hardship not actually self-created? Well, some things change over time. I mentioned earlier a roadway going through. Maybe there's a roadway extension that was not anticipated before. It impacts the property in a negative way. That's something that you didn't create yourself. That was something that happened outside of the applicant's control. Okay. I think we'll move on now, Dakota.
Move on to area. Yeah.
Area. Yep. I think
just wanted to add one piece on not self-created for on the use side. Zoning, land use regs change, and uses can become permitted or not permitted. Those types of things too, and that information can be hard to come by sometimes, even though there are public hearings. But land use regulations can change, and therefore an applicant may not know of that information. But then again, keeping an eye on that stuff is always good. Best practice. Okay, moving back to the area side, and Michael, we'll get to your question when we get to the last point in terms of the balance of interest test for area variances. Going through the area variance criteria again. Remember the balance of interest test to consider when looking at an area variance application. An undesirable change to the neighborhood. Couple options here. Say something to consider. Structure moved closer to the road will not impact neighbors' view. Definitely something to consider and important. But consider this, not having, say, a 10-foot, granting an area variance for a 10-foot high fence in a side yard that will obstruct an intersection. And commonly, on corner lots, we will see additional regulations to accommodate that kind of piece. But you want to take into account what's going to have a more of an impact or a change to a particular neighborhood. And then again, can an alternative be achieved? Looking at a site plan, can you move a particular proposal to avoid granting a variance in any case? Granted, we hear, the path of least resistance, the spot is just easier, makes sense. However, can you move it 10 feet to the right or onto a different location on the parcel to accommodate the existing regulations? Definitely is It can happen for sure. Okay, and number 3, is it substantial? Yeah, the examples here, say a sign needs a 10% size increase, compared to a sign that will triple in size. It depends. Oh, and something. Well, maybe let me backtrack a little bit. Area variances can be granted for signs as well. In this example here, whether or not it's substantial or not, someone seeking an area variance for a sign and the size maybe going up just 10%, maybe not substantial compared to, going from a 3x4 sign to a billboard. That could be considered substantial for sure. And number 4, negative impact on the environment. If a variance were to be granted, ultimately, there should have no impact off-site. All those impacts, if they are to occur, should happen on the applicant's site. And then, as I mentioned before, not this, in terms of considering runoff, if a variance were to be granted and would increase runoff into neighbor's property, yeah, that would be cause for concern for sure. And then moving into, Michael Wheel had asked a question about self-created hardship per area variances. And what's the big difference here in terms of use and area? And I'll read what the state has in terms of language for the self-created hardship for area variances. The alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision, but shall not necessarily preclude granting the variance. So ultimately, on the area side, there is some wiggle room, and the state provides that language as well. It's not as testable when compared to the use variance. There is ultimately some wiggle room, and on the area side, we're allowing for some room to breathe and accommodating unreasonable state land use regulations. Michael on the chat there, does that answer your question? And you can unmute if you want, or you can respond in the chat. So the big, and I should repeat that, an applicant for an area variance does not have to meet all of the balance of interest tests, but the ZBA has to consider those when considering granting an area variance. Yeah, for sure. Michael had responded, it's often more complicated, and this is a hang up sometimes. I could imagine, we could imagine that for sure. Okay.
Just one more thought on that.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, Dakota. Boy. Just in response to Mike's question, yeah, it basically you get a free pass for this one, the self-created hardship, that you can consider it or you don't have to consider it. It may be in the interest of the community to consider that, well, they've asked for this for every single property that they have. It's, they continue to use it as a workaround. So maybe, you could say, we're going to see you've continued to do this. We're not going to allow it this time. So you have that latitude there to use it as something to back up a denial for an area variance, or you can say, well, really doesn't have that big of an impact here, and of course it's self-created because they've. It has to be. You do, I guess the question of consistency comes into play there. You do always want to be consistent with your decisions, but I say that with the understanding that every single project is unique. And so every circumstance has a little bit of a nuance that goes with it. So, you individuals live it every day. We see it, only the ones that are referable to the county do we see with regard to area variances. So it's easier for us to sit here and say, oh yeah, just let it slide or don't let it slide. But we appreciate the challenges that go with that for sure.
Yeah, Jason and I were talking briefly before we let the participants in about just the ZBA in terms of its meeting schedule can be very infrequent, definitely not as often as the planning board, and to remember this information is challenging for sure. Definitely recommend from time to time taking a look at the use and area criteria from time to time. Helpful to refresh memory for sure. Okay, 6:39, Jason, we're looking
Yeah,
good.
we're good. We got 6 minutes to talk a few examples here.
Okay, I'll start with the area. Jason, you want to do the use?
Sure.
Okay. Some examples that we see that come through the planning office and the planning board as well. Recently, a project in the village of Potsdam, a steward shop. Pretty interesting project for sure. And the location resulted in a variety, or not variety, maybe one, I think 2 or 3 area variances that would have been required, considering how the code was written today in terms of how a business use like a steward's was in relation to residential properties within a certain buffer from that particular parcel. And as the project progressed, the village eventually changed the code to accommodate that use. So variances were, or it sounded like would have been sought to move the project along, but that eventually ended up in resulting in a code change. Jason had mentioned that before. That can happen on the use side as well. You know, a code change can happen to make a use permitted by right or by special use permit. Some other pieces, you know, changing parking split space sizes in Ogdensburg. Commercial use wanted to fit a bit more parking in, so they suggested an area variance, you know, reducing the parking width from 10 feet to 9 feet. Construction of a building and pavement closer to front lot lines, another example of an area variance that was granted or considered. And then change size setback from 12 to 13. You know, as we look back in the criteria for the area variance, is that substantial? Well, it all depends on the project, essentially, as we've repeated throughout the presentation. Project is unique, could be a large lot size with plenty of room, so maybe not substantial for the local municipality or the ZBA to figure out. And to make a note here on subdivisions, from time to time, we'll see a subdivision come through our office in the county planning board that may have a lot that's non-conforming per the land use regulations, and there is a possibility to seek an area variance for those types of things as well. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Dakota. All right, a couple of use variance examples, and these are tricky because they sound pretty benign. The first one, add a third apartment to a two unit structure in the village of Messina. The limitation in this area was for a max of 2 units. They wanted to put a third unit into that structure. The question here is why? Could they meet those legal tests? Could they show that we can't keep the units up, maintenance and everything else, without having that additional revenue from that third apartment? That would be the first test, the dollars and cents test. Self-created hardship, boy, it'd be hard to meet the self-created hardship one there because they're already using it. So yeah, I don't know what the outcome of this project in particular was, but that I would think the first one would be difficult to meet. Next one's even maybe maybe a little easier. Reopen the old Messina Metals location as a metal yard. So here we had some time lapse, right? It was a metal yard at one point. It was not for an extended period of time. It wanted to reopen as a former use. Okay, so neighborhood character will really come into play here. Again, the dollars and cents legal test might be challenging. Self-created hardship, not sure really how you would meet that one, other than possibly saying there was a hiatus for the business. So these that the business closed and then wanted to reopen again. You know, the use itself was not going to be that different from prior uses, but it's tough. It's a tough decision to get to all 4 legal tests being met here. Last one, construction of various small structures on an undersized lot in the village of Waddington. This is an interesting situation where an area variance was initially sought for a residence. Area variance was denied because the lot was too small, couldn't fit a residence in there. So the applicant wanted to do something else. They didn't want to use it as a residence. They just wanted to use it sort of as a recreational lot where they were going to have a pergola and a screened-in gazebo and a change room with a bathroom facility, and it was really a interesting project. The use variance aspect comes into it because it was there were accessory uses on a project or on a parcel. However, there was no primary use. There was no primary residence. So they were asking for accessory buildings to something that there was no primary. So that was the requirement for the use variance. The use itself wasn't that intrusive, if you will, but it was challenging. So in terms of outcome, I'm afraid I don't know the outcome of the first one. The third one was granted, and I just want to, someone put something in the chat. Local knowledge is always the best knowledge. For the metal yard, if it had the variance initially, wouldn't be granted this time. If it had, that's a good question. If it had the variance initially, so if a use variance was granted 30 years ago for the metal yard, and it went out of business, and then it came back, would they need another variance? And the answer there is back to keeping good records. What did that 30-year-old variance say? Did it specify if you go out of business for a year, you need another use variance? Or did it not? If it was silent on it, then the use variance runs with the land, and that initial use variance would still be good. So, okay, we're a minute over. I'm sorry that we got into the variance discussion there. I don't want to cut anybody off though. If anybody has any final questions on variances, please let us know, and we'll take a minute here to address those. Either in the chat or just feel free to unmute. And if not,
what comes to mind on the metal yard example there, that maybe it was an established use historically, became non-conforming, and then went out of business, and possibly that's the reason for seeking a use variance. Another avenue.
Good point, Dakota. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. We'll jump right into our second topic tonight here on solar array development.
Right.
Boy, what a topic. This is a big one. We're going to try to whiz through it in 43 minutes. I think we can do it. We'll try to do it justice in that amount of time. Certainly we'll have additional discussions about it at future training sessions, and always feel free to mention this now, mention it at the end again. If anyone has any questions, always feel that you can contact the county planning office. We're a resource for everyone in the county here, and we want to impart any information that we can to you as you navigate the solar array development explosion, if you will, that's happening in St. Lawrence County. And why is it happening? And it's basically a result of some state actions and state directives. Some of you may have heard of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, that it essentially, from the top down, from the state, the highest state level, said New York State is going to be a welcoming state for renewable energy. We want to see renewables, so much so that they have this clean energy standard. Oh, if you can sit back then. Thanks. Clean energy, we got to make up time, but we'll get through it. Clean energy standard, which is 70% of New York's energy to come from renewables by 2030. Boy, that's a lofty goal. We're 8 years out. We're not quite there, So that is the rationale for so much solar development. It's not only here in St. Lawrence County, although you think that we're a big one. It's all over the state. And but you know, we're focused on St. Lawrence County, and our focus here is, you know, why in St. Lawrence County? And it's comparatively inexpensive and plentiful land that's really driving the solar explosion in St. Lawrence County. We've got a lot of land. We have individuals that are looking to divest themselves of some land, looking for lease arrangements. We also have a pretty solid grid in place now, and it's continuously being upgraded. We also have, you've all seen the smart path, those two new towers that have gone through coming out of NIPA. They are primarily going to be taking up solar power from large projects, but it's all part of the I guess the plan to get to that renewable goal, and also looking to St. Lawrence County to accommodate some of those uses. So now we can zip to the next slide, Dakota.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So what can we do? What can we do at the local level? We can't do too much for these larger projects. There are projects that are broken down by size. There's projects over 20 megawatts and projects under 20 megawatts. Local municipalities have no control over projects that are over 20 megawatts in size. When I say no control, it doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity to go to public meetings, to offer input, to say, hey, you should be doing it this way. What I mean is that you, as a planning board or a zoning board of appeals, will not be granting area variances, will not be granting special use permits for larger solar arrays. Right now, there are about 5 or 6 projects that we've heard about. The governor just announced today one that I had not heard about in St. Lawrence County in the town of DeKalb, but there's numerous other ones. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Rich Road Solar in Canton, the Canton area. That's 240 megawatts. That's a big one. The one up in Messina, 180 megawatts. Those are happening, regulated by the state through what's called either an Article 10 or a 94th C regulatory process. We do not have that much say in those. But what we do have a say in is the smaller projects. And there are lots of those. County, we have our record, Dakota's been keeping a log of all these projects. I'll show you a map in a minute of them. We've had over 30 projects in the last 5 years or so of these 5 megawatt projects. And those municipalities do have some say over, and they can regulate that either by local law or through a zoning code. Some municipalities have a standalone solar local law and also language in their zoning code to address it. Some municipalities have incorporated their solar language into their zoning. Some are going to be doing that, and other municipalities just have a standalone local law because they have no zoning. They just have site plan review. Some municipalities just have the site plan review process, but they have a separate standalone local law to regulate solar because it is such a concern in those communities. Mentioned 5 megawatts. What is that? Think of 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. So we're seeing a footprint inside a fence line of between 25 and 35 acres for these 5 megawatt projects. That's that can be pretty impactful if it's going to be in a prime agricultural area at 35 acres. Just seeing a question in the chat about tillable farmland. We will talk about that and see if we answer that question. And if not, we'll look for just a little bit more detail when after we go through that section. But so we've got projects. What else do projects need to actually develop? Developers, it's interesting. We've seen a whole cross section of developers. Some are pure snake oil salespeople, and I don't mean to be too derogatory, but we have seen some projects that we have spent taxpayer money reviewing that have gone nowhere because they were never going to go anywhere, because they're purely speculative by developers. They did not have some of the external supports that really need to happen before a project's going to go forward. And what are those supports? Three-phase power. If a solar array is going to be developed, it really needs to get that power somewhere, and that requires the existence of three-phase power. Now, not to be too disparaging about the developer I mentioned earlier, yeah, they could have footed the bill to put in three-phase power to get that out of the community, but they did not have an interest in doing that. Substation capacity is another thing. There are limits to what a substation can take up from local solar arrays. So if there's a limitation on that power, then, or on that capacity, then there needs to be an investment in those substations. And some developers are certainly making that investment. Others are not. And so it is a intricate, detailed game, if you will. It's not the best choice of words, but a very, very intricate process to get these solar projects developed. And we're just seeing sort of the front end of them now. We have seen, as I mentioned, those 30 projects. There are not more than 10 that have been built in the county to date. They're still coming, presumably, but some may not develop at all because of the lack of some of those supports I mentioned. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, thanks, Dakota. Here's the map that I mentioned earlier. This is all those little orange squares. Those are footprints, solar footprints of the parcel, not of the actual array itself, not that 25 to 35 acre footprint, but of the parcel, just because it's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier to see. But you can see that they're scattered throughout the northern part of the county. Not so much in the hillier Adirondack section. Park certainly has some some regulation to limit the development down there. That's not to say that they are not proposed in the park. There's one pending down in the town of Fine that we'll see coming through the county planning board in the near future. But just you can see a large cross section of projects here. The big one up in Messina, I mentioned that 180 meg one, that you can see is consumptive of about 2,000 acres of land, and the one right in the middle of Canton is about 5,000 acres of land that will be used for solar. Proposed solar development there. Okay, so we know it's happening. You've probably seen it in your town. Many of you already have regs in your town, and that's great. We've reviewed a number of different local laws, solar local laws, yeah, thanks, Dakota, for sharing that link to the map with everyone's in the chat. What should be in your municipal solar regulations? If you're still looking to develop some, here's a good cross section. If you have developed them, there always is room to modify if you feel the need to modify your regulations. So if you pick up something here that isn't in your current regs, let us know. We can help you to get it added, or feel free to go ahead and work on that yourselves. So definitions, of course, we want to talk about what we're talking about, right? So defining what a small scale operation is, what a large scale operation is. Large scale usually has to do with utility grade, or selling power back to the grid. Small, depending on how you want to define it, it could be a rooftop array on a residential structure. For municipalities with zoning, specify where you want the arrays to go. Do you want them everywhere? Do you want them in residential zones? Do you only want them in commercial zones or in industrial zones? Specify that up front. That will make your life a lot easier with reviews, because you will limit where that type of development can go. Some clear and specific design standards. The clearer you are, the better. The more specific, the better. It's always easier to go and say, well, you should be considered, or minimize. We've seen that terminology a lot. Minimize impacts. What does minimize mean, right? Give some examples of, we want to limit how much development can be on prime agricultural land to a percentage, not to minimize it only. So clear and specific design standards. Other things to consider there: buffering. You want to buffer around these developments for impacts, offsite impacts, visual impacts. They don't make a lot of noise, so that's a good thing, but they can be, depending on where they are, they can be unsightly. Lighting. What kind of lighting is going to be associated with it? That would go under design standards. Signage, fencing, all those sorts of things. The decommissioning plan. What's going to happen in 30 years when this thing goes away and the developer is nowhere to be seen? How are you going to tear it down? Do you have a decommissioning plan with a specified bond that will allow for a payment and an escalation in that payment should the developer, the owner, go out of business and you're stuck with a defunct 35-acre hunk of glass and metal? What do you do with it? How do you get it back to its original state? That's a very important component. And often we've seen many that in the decommissioning plans that applicants will provide, they actually roll in the salvage value of the product of the facility, all the metal and the glass and everything, into reducing how much they actually are going to pay. They say, oh, well, we'll get so much in scrap value for this. Well, no one knows what scrap value is going to be like in 30 years, including them. And it's very difficult right now to recycle solar panels. What do you do with the heavy metals in them, the glass, that sort of thing? So there's some considerations there that should be in a decommissioning plan. You want to make sure that the applicant, that you specify in your law what should be in a decommissioning plan, and have the applicant stick to it. Special use permit requirements. Here is where we sort of we segue between the zoning law and the local law. Special use permit requirements may be in your zoning code for how you actually want to see these projects develop. It may be in your local law. It may cross over. Again, for communities without zoning, special use permits are not in play here. Those are only reserved for municipalities with zoning. But we've seen a number of codes that have specific special use permit standards for solar arrays in their zoning as well as in their local law. Just some considerations there. I think we'll move on to a couple more that Dakota is going to talk about.
Okay, we had a question in the chat, Jason.
Thanks.
From Lawrence: effect on solar on airport traffic / small planes.
Yeah,
we can get to that, but does Northside come to mind in terms of what they did to accommodate? Northside's the project in Messina, Brazier, and Norfolk.
Right. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Another good example is in Potsdam. There's an array right next door to the airport. And it can happen. They can co-locate. There has to be orientation, so there isn't glare from the panels that would impact the air traffic. They also have a glare screen they can put on the panels so that they don't actually reflect directly off of the panel. But there are workarounds. So yeah, good consideration. Certainly something you want to have as it could be as either a design standard or a special use permit requirement. Make sure that they're not going to impact the airport. Setbacks from airport runways, that sort of thing, are all things that should be considered in a regulation for solar.
Okay. Continuing with what can municipalities do for solar regulations when considering agricultural land protections? We see this in solar laws in the county for sure, and we see the word minimize too in regards to prime farmland. You can be specific in your laws, and we're not there yet, but maybe that may come in terms of adjusting land use regulations to better protect prime ag land. It can be identified by soil type. All of this data, this information exists. If you don't know where to look, the planning office, we can help you find that data. The data is in terms of prime farmland, which is made up of prime soils. The DANK IMA, which I'm hoping most of you know how to access, is a web mapping interface similar to the link I put up there, and we can put the link up for the DANK IMA as well. Their internet mapping application shows parcel boundaries, shows zoning per the municipalities that have it, and also within the agricultural atlas layer, there's a data set for prime farmland. So you can get an idea of a project and how it may impact prime farmland. And you could potentially write that into your regs as well. And consider development limitations on prime farmland by percentage. This is something that we've been discussing more so recently, and with our help, some of you may know Matilda Larson, our colleague here in the planning office, who continues to help with land use projects. She did calculations for prime and prime if drained per municipality in the town. And from there, we could get a better idea of how much, if we were to limit it by percentage, how much it actually would potentially take up within the town. And I think what it's coming down to, maybe there wouldn't be a 50% threshold for the whole town, but maybe limit that percentage down per project to somewhere even as low as, if a solar project is proposed on a particular parcel, that the solar project can only displace about 10% of prime and prime if drained soils. Something in addition to keep in mind in your code is the promotion of agrivoltaics. We are seeing this in across the globe, across the country as well, in maybe more populated environments. They have some resources here to have sheep and goats grazing on these arrays. The arrays that we're seeing at the municipal level, as Jason mentioned, are up 5 megawatts, say 25 to 30 acres. But on the grazing part, we are encouraging developers to produce this, a potential contract for grazing operations, but really don't have that infrastructure up here yet. Maybe that's coming. It's happening in other places throughout the state. It may happen up here. Well, it remains to be seen. More so recently, we're seeing in applications as well, developers put in language for pollinator species. After their array is set up, they plan to plant a whole host of native pollinator species underneath the array. So just another option to encourage some sort of continued agricultural use on these particular sites, if they do, in fact, have a solar array sited on them. Okay, continuing the same theme, language about property operation and maintenance plan. To kind of go, the grazing operation kind of fits in here in terms of vegetation management, but commonly we'll see details on how often they will visit the site. What is the landscaping plan? Are they going to be using herbicides to treat vegetation? How often are they going to mow it? Be nice to reduce or eliminate those impactful impacts as best as possible. Host community benefit agreement. We are seeing these being negotiated as we speak in certain towns in the county. The town can negotiate with the developer in terms of some sort of funds that can come back to the town to be used for projects that are chronically underfunded in the town. Definitely something that should be on the table so the towns can realize some sort of benefit from that. Power purchase agreements. We've been seeing this in the press, I'm sure you all have as well, of some sort of community scale buying, purchasing option. hopefully this will come to play out in our case here to reduce electricity costs in the county. And we're seeing that developers are offering that as well. I'm sure some of you, I've received them in the mail from one developer in particular called Nextamp, is commonly mailing out flyers about reducing, signing up with them for community solar and reducing your power bill 5 to 10%. Maybe the power purchase agreements that are built from, say, the community or from the municipal effort, maybe there's more savings to be had. Pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. We definitely see this language in solar regs to remind developers and municipalities to begin negotiating with developers about this particular piece. And what a common avenue is to use the St. Lawrence County Industrial Development Agency, the IDA, to help negotiate a pilot for taxing jurisdictions. That be the school, the county, the town, and the village. And I should reference there that when a developer sends out, say, they'll send out a pilot language letter to a taxing jurisdiction. Oh my goodness, I can't say it. They'll send out this letter to the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction has 60 days to respond. And if the jurisdiction does not respond within that 60 days, then that pilot time limit has expired. So the taxing jurisdiction could lose out on potential pilot there. Okay, before I go on to the next slide here, got a question. If you already have an agreement, will the town agreement give us more savings? From Lawrence. Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure on that. Jason, I think he's saying if you have a personal, say like the developer Nextamp, we sign up for a 5 to 10% saving, then your municipality also does some sort of power purchase agreement. Could you reduce your power bill that much more?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I think that it all depends on how that deal is negotiated and what you have in place already. So it would really be tough for us to answer that question. I think how's this for an answer? It depends. How's that? Sorry, I can't be more specific.
Okay, Jason, this one's you. Or am I 21?
Yep. Okay. Is this me?
I believe so. I could keep rolling though.
I can talk to it. Sure. All right. Yes. Okay. Encourage solar developers to talk with you at the earliest possible stage before a site is selected. That's something that is really has challenged us. Is we will get projects in at the county level and we get them after you get them. So you'll get them at the local level, and they've spent thousands of dollars on drawings. They spent thousands of dollars on land, or not landscape, surveying, putting it all together, and they're really in poor spots. They haven't done their due diligence to look at what makes sense for development in your community. What they've done, and we've got this directly from the developers, they send out just a scatter shot of hard copy mailing to municipality residences, to homeowners, and say, hey, are you interested in having solar on your property? And whoever responds, that's where they pursue. Well, okay, that's one way to do it. But wouldn't a more logical way of doing it is to look at some maps, look at where community actually allows for solar to happen, first of all, in what districts solar is permitted. So in getting municipalities involved, or getting developers involved as early as possible, is really a key to getting the best location, first of all, and the best project. And talk with us. We're happy to help you look through the IMA that Dakota mentioned earlier, to see where do we want solar in the town of X? Where does it make sense to allow it? Another thing to be,
Jason, can I add a couple things there?
yeah, absolutely.
What comes to mind in terms of working with developers, and sorry, this is totally my slide.
Oh, okay. I'll let you keep going.
Cool. Is encouraging the developer to look through the zoning or the solar law, if it's in your zoning regulations or it's a standalone law, and it is pretty amazing. That information is fairly detailed, available for the most part, and what a potential developer would have to do to satisfy the law. And still, we see some projects where it seems like they aren't taking everything into account. So the earlier you can get on that kind of a communication path with a developer, the better. Interconnect. How is the project going to interconnect to the grid? And is the developer in the queue? So the queue is in relation more so to the substations that these three-phase feeder lines feed into. And commonly, as Jason spoke to before, we had reviewed projects that had no idea, had done really very minimal communication or their due diligence with National Grid to investigate a project's viability on the local grid network. And those projects, or the requirements that were needed in terms of accommodating those projects, became project killers because they were just too expensive for the developer. So what we see commonly with an application that is put together, we'll see a CESA report, which is a coordinated electric standard interconnection review, and the developer will pay for that. In that detail, you can see where they are in the queue for a particular substation. Say a substation has a capacity of 26 megawatts. The CESA report will say, oh, they are the last 5 megawatt project within that 26, even though that that substation may have a queue of another 10 megawatts. The CESA report will show that that particular project is within that capacity threshold. And an interesting piece in terms of upgrades that we're seeing as well is that substation upgrades can be costly and can be project killers. However, developers in communication with National Grid can cost share those particular upgrades to reduce the costs on a particular project and to make those costs more reasonable, spread across more projects to upgrade those substations. So we'll see how that will play out in the county in the near future. Say Potsdam, Canton, Oswegatchie area, those substations are at capacity with the planned projects, and definitely say 10 megawatts in the queue, and we'll see if substation upgrades occur to accommodate those particular projects. Specific areas in your community that are preferred or off limits. As Jason mentioned before, you can use your land use regs to push this type of development into an area that your community would deem it appropriate. That be in industrial spaces. Residential, not sure for the large scale project, but residential agricultural, maybe. But then again, you can also include language that protects prime farmland as well.
Dakota, can I just jump in here for a second on that one? I'm thinking, many municipalities now have limited zones. They have a rural zone and a residential zone, or a rural agricultural zone. You can add additional zones to your code and say, we only want solar in our solar zone, and then specify individual areas that are not in your best agricultural areas. That would be a solution to addressing where they can go.
Oh, and so this is very similar to, say, a wind overlay zone that some municipalities have adopted. They apply certain restrictions to siting for industrial scale wind, and that will dictate within the town where those that type of use is appropriate.
Great parallel example.
Yeah. Approvals. definitely can be lengthy to a degree. Commonly, municipalities zoning regs will permit solar project, major solar project, the larger ones via special use permit, which will include a site plan approval and might include variances as well, because sometimes we'll see fence lines and array boundaries butt up against, say, a 100-foot buffer against a neighboring residential property. So commonly, when we're reviewing a project, we'll make note of that, and a developer, they could adjust the array to stay out of those setbacks if needed, or seek area variances. Okay. Moving on here, give you an idea of national grid infrastructure. Town of Madrid here in the center, town of Potsdam to the south, Waddington to the north, Lisbon to the southwest. Blue lines represent National Grid's three-phase distributed generation infrastructure. And as you can see, the black lines represent, a little bit confusing here from an older data set. Black lines here up following my cursor on the left side of the screen represent parcels where a solar project is proposed. And as we move closer to the red polygon here, you see some more black outlines. The red polygon here is a project we recently reviewed in Madrid called Acer Solar along Cogswell Road. And you'll see the red border being the border of the parcel, and the black being the outline of the array. So siting location, we're finding out developers definitely are not are making sure that they're siting these close to available infrastructure, without a doubt. And you can see there's a substation right up here as well. And what's nice in their hosting capacity information, you can check on these particular substations to see what the capacity is, what the queue is. And like for this project here, they had submitted a CSER report, and we could check in that report to see where they fit in the queue for that particular substation. If they're going to that substation, they may be going to a substation at another location. So this has been helpful for us to kind of get an idea of why developers are citing their projects at particular locations. Another helpful piece here is, and you can use this on that the link I sent you for the solar web app, you can pull up prime ag land as well to see where those prime farmland and prime frame soils are. So maybe developers, if they took some more time, they could factor that in to maybe move their array to be less impactful to prime and prime frame farmland. But that can be difficult depending on the location too, because there's a lot of prime and prime farmland, especially this part of the county, maybe not so much in other parts of the county. And before moving on, I want to reference, so this is distributed generation. What we don't see on their hosting capacity maps is their transmission infrastructure, and they have three-phase transmission lines. But it seems like the component that is important there, connecting a solar project directly into the transmission line, is more expensive than the distributed generation lines. So projects are going to take that path of least resistance, or developers are going to take that path of least resistance and check out where these three-phase infrastructure, or the three-phase DG infrastructure is, and take that approach. And what's nice, this is regularly available to the public. If it's something you need help accessing, be glad to help you. Did you want to add anything, Jason?
No, I think that's good coverage and a great segue, because we're going to be talking about a little bit more about the project that you just saw in orange, and also some of the overlays from the internet mapping application that show the prime land and prime ag land. So, okay, moving on here. Want to be mindful of the time. We got about 8 minutes left, and 8 slides or so. So, minute a slide. Here we go. Here's the site plan from that project at Cogswell Corner, 50 Cogswell Corners. Just as an example of what you should be looking for from a developer. This is, as was mentioned, Acer Solar or Cypress Creek. They have multiple names. Many of these projects have multiple names. But this is a good one. They were pretty thorough in what they presented to us, and they don't all look this thorough. When I say thorough, I mean they've got the actual footprint of the array. They've got the wetlands demarcated on the site. They've got the fence line, the dimensions on here, a lot of information about the interconnect right here on the lower left. Thank you, Dakota. I'm using my cursor. You guys can't see it, but Dakota's got it. And then some over here, zoning compliance table. They actually looked at what's in the zoning code and said, okay, how do we comply with what's in this case, the town of Madrid's zoning code? And then, of course, the basics, the scale, the north arrow, all the good stuff that should be on a site plan. So use this as an example, as something that, okay, if we're going to get one from a developer, we want to make sure that they meet the standards of what we ask for with the site plan. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. So zooming in a little bit more, here is some aerial imagery of the Cogswell Corners array. This is like a 4.4 megawatt array, so about 25 acres or so inside the black outline there, which is the fence line. And you can see that this is going to be consumptive of what appears to be pretty prime agricultural land. How do we know it's prime? Well, you can't really tell necessarily from this picture, but you can tell from this picture that it's been actively used recently. The bottom left is certainly that's lighter soil that's been tilled at some point. The center top a hay field most likely, but active. It doesn't look like it's been overgrown or not tilled recently. It also shows the array going into some wooded land here, and that's challenging, right? Because we don't necessarily want to cut down trees to develop something that's renewable energy. Why do we have renewable energy? It's to prevent a number of different things. Well, trees do the same thing that our renewable energy directives are trying to do. So cutting down trees to put up solar panels is not the best scenario. So that's something to look at as well. We'll go on to the next slide here, and same image on the next one, except we've got a little bit more information now. Now, again, taking this information from the publicly available internet mapping application from the Development Authority. We'll get you the link at the end of the slideshow here. You can see that, again, the black outline, and we've got the darker green is all prime farmland, and then the lighter green is the lightest of the green. There's one in the middle if you're looking at the legend, the one on the bottom, prime farmland if drained. So it may, this in fact was not tile drained, but if it were tile drained, then the whole area inside the footprint, inside the black line, would be prime agricultural land. And that's something that is very finite in the county. St. Lawrence County only has 19% of its land is considered prime. And that 19% doesn't mean that that's all accessible for agricultural use. That means that, there's a lot of forest land that has prime agricultural, prime soils underneath it. A lot of land in municipalities that have buildings built on them have prime farmland. So this is actually even less than 19% of where we have prime farmland that is being actively used for agriculture. So something we want to be careful to protect. Okay, we'll keep going. Another slide here. Oh, yes. I think we're back to Dakota. All right, we're back. Thanks, Dakota.
This is an example of what we use in our project review. If a municipality has zoning or a local law for solar regulation, we'll pick apart the particular features of the law. Say maybe it's made up of articles, and write down, well, we'll title subtitle those in terms of where it is within the local law, and we'll address the feature on the left side, and we'll address how it's required, if the applicant provided that information, is it satisfactory, and then we'll comment on it as well at the county planning board level. And we were charged with assessing countywide impacts of these projects, and one of those particular pieces that we find helpful is helping municipalities interpret their own land use regulations, and that in itself is a countywide impact to make sure that projects are following local land use regulations in your communities. So commonly when you'll see a project review, this type of detail is what we send back to the municipalities. If you're interested in these types of examples, we'd be happy to share them with you for other solar projects we have reviewed in the county. Okay, and some examples here as we get close to time. Town of Governor, Peabody Road, and Little Bow Road. Just south of here is the Village of Governor, the fairground infrastructure, for wayfinding. Just give you an idea of where maybe a better parcel is to be used in terms of siting solar. 126 Little Bow Road has just a little bit of prime farmland if drained, and we would look into that particular parcel to see if it's tile drained or not. So maybe that's a better location when compared to 218 Peabody Road that has a significant chunk of prime farmland if drained. And if that farm is tile drained as well, then it only boosts the productivity of those soils potentially. And as we move on, give you an idea of what a site plan would look like at 126 Little Bow Road. Two projects were proposed there, both at about the 5 megawatt, I think a little bit under 5 megawatt range. But you can see how the array was proposed on that particular parcel. And an interesting piece with one parcel, there's National Grid has an interesting regulation that one parcel can only have a certain amount of megawatts. So this parcel was actually subdivided to accommodate both projects. And we saw that in another project in the town of Lawrence, where they had, like a 150-acre parcel. They had two projects planned on that parcel, but they had to subdivide to separate per the amount of megawatt wattage allowed. And that's a National Grid regulation. But look at the site plan here, you get an idea of the access road coming from the road through the farm, and then around the eastern edge of the array and up to the northern array as well. And probably a good location for siting a solar array because of the impacts to prime farmland are not as significant. Okay. Resources. Jason, any more thoughts in terms of solar?
Oh, there you.
Yep,
all right,
there
we go. I'm looking at the time, 7:30 on the button.
Boom.
Here. We won't keep you too much longer. Of course, happy to answer any questions if people do want to stick around, but just some other training resources here. That was a good cross-section, what Dakota was talking about with solar. We've got more information here. A really good resource is Tug Hill Commission. This link, they just updated this in 2021. And it has a lot of information from the state as well as local examples of land use regulation, local laws, that sort of thing. Ecode 360, if you're looking at for other examples of what other municipalities throughout the state have done, this is a great library. Some of you I know are on Ecode 360. Can be very helpful to see what other communities are doing. The DANK IMA referenced a number of times, that imagery that we pulled up, some was from DANK. And Department of State, always a good resource for training. Here's their 2022 schedule. Planning, SLC planning project referral information. We need to see projects, as you know, within 500 feet of municipal boundaries, agricultural districts, county or state highways. That referral map will show you where actually parcels are that do need to see a project referred to the county. And then some other planning resources on our website as well that Dakota's been doing a great job of keeping up to date. And sorry, we're a couple minutes over. Just want to take a quick look in the chat here. If there are any final questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute is fine. And we thank you for your time. We will look to get certificates to you in the next little while. Again, last comment, put your name. If you haven't put your name in the chat, please do so. That way we'll know who was here and we will get a certificate out to you. Yes, access to the PowerPoint slides. We'll put that up as well under the planning resources, the slides. Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, we want to thank you for your time and always feel free to give us a call if there are any questions.
Yes, please do. Don't hesitate to call.
Okay, I think probably okay.
Okay, you can
Yeah.
stop recording too if you want there.
Yep,
Jason.
I will do that. Thank you.
Great.